Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated economist here. So we're back with Kéta from Madison Lumber Reporter. Very great topics that we covered yesterday. Had a great interview, about a half an hour long. Go down into the description to find the link to part one of this interview. This is going to be part two. We're going to start off by talking about pricing in this one. So everybody wants to know what's going to happen with pricing. Where were we? Where are we headed?
Right. And so what I'm going to say, because yesterday we talked a little bit about the past couple of years compared to historically and the seasonal trend that we got used to that didn't really happen in the past couple of years. So we don't know if it's going to happen this year. But one thing that I have noticed in the price trend, like the lines on my graphs, is that where we are right now, like in August of this year, 2022, the two lines are matching where last 2 years ago was ending 2020. So all of the volatility that we were talking about yesterday with like 2021 going so crazy high and then low again, let's maybe put that aside and look at 2020 as potentially sort of like a baseline. And of course, nobody knows what's going to happen through the rest of this year. But one thing that I can say is that all of that huge volatility that we saw is not going to happen right now. We've got some really good stability. I did mention yesterday how West Fraser announced a couple of weeks ago they're taking Fraser Lakes basically offline. They said curtail, but it's going to close that mill. Today, Conifex announced Mackenzie, and that is, if I remember correctly, 26 million board feet in 6 weeks closure that's going to be taken out of production. So that's why I'm saying we're not going to have that much volatility, and I do expect prices to be somewhat stable compared to where they are right now, because the mills are responding a lot more quickly than they used to by taking production offline and keeping that supply-demand balance in better form.
All right. So pretty much the price of the futures or cash price, even once it drops to a particular level, the mills are just no longer going to be producing at that point. And that's when they start going into curtailment. Now, West Fraser, this is a huge company. I mean, West Fraser's like, what, the biggest mill? They got to be one of the top three, right?
Yeah, there's three that are sort of like in the works for being the top three, and that's Canfor, Interfor, and West Fraser. They are definitely between them, the entire industry here in British Columbia. Everyone else put together is not as big as even one of them, right? Mm-hmm. And due to like what we were talking about yesterday with the beetle kill and the reduction in the timber supply over the past many years, these three companies have been investing in sawmill buying in the U.S. South. So they're diversifying. They still have their Western spruce pine fir, but they're also Southern yellow pine producers. They're producing U.S. lumber in the U.S., and they don't have to pay duty on that wood, okay? So the size of the companies with those really big mills that are taking curtailments is significant and speaks to the ability to respond. And so when you have the past couple of years where demand just went nuts and really nobody was prepared, like even the mills, nobody knew that was going to happen. Scrambling, like I said yesterday, it takes 6 months to secure timber supply, get the logs into the mill, trying to bring supply up to what that demand spike. Now we have like a moderating where it's leveling off, and they're doing the same response to curtail. And so the prices should moderate within like a reasonable range, which is sort of able for the user, the builders, the retailers, the homeowners to make their plans. It's not going to triple, right? And so for normal time, like historically, there's a seasonality to lumber prices and demand. And usually it goes sort of around February, prices start to firm up. And that's because the very large buyers of lumber, the US home builders, the large home building companies, they make their purchases early in the year for their planned projects because they want the wood that they need on the ground before they start building those big developments. So February, March, April, prices are quite strong. Somewhere by about June, they start to soften because most people already have the wood that they, or at least have ordered the wood that they need. And then what we like to say is Labor Day is the beginning of the end, and US Thanksgiving is the end of the end. By the time you get to US Thanksgiving and winter, not a lot of people break ground on a new home. There's not a lot of construction going on. Sawmills are curtailing, it's freezing, all that kind of stuff, and prices drop. In the last 2 years, we did not have that cycle. And the realtors are also saying that they didn't have seasonal cycle. Like people going on open houses for January 1st, like that's not normal. So traditional seasonality hasn't been in play for the past couple of years, and we don't know if that's now gone or is just temporary. But the real volatility in response to these big changes in society that we had in the past couple of years does seem to be behind us.
Right. So if you were to call a bottom, where do you think that is? I know obviously predicting is always kind of a tricky thing to try and do, but if there was a bottom in the pricing of lumber, at least in the futures or in the cash price at the mill, when do you think that would be? Because there's obviously a lag before it hits the retail. So when could the customers or the people out there looking to do projects, if they were anticipating on timing, where could they expect the low to be, and where would their timing be for like starting their projects?
Yeah, the low from the mills is going to be like November.
In November. Okay.
And futures, you just need to really be careful because technically futures only matters when the contract is closing. So when people look at futures, and I suggest this to you as well, when you're doing your research, the price is one thing, but the volumes tells you everything. So remember how I was saying yesterday when the price of lumber went to 1,700, but not a lot of wood was sold at that level. So same thing with futures. Today it's down, it's somewhere under 500. There's like 8 trades, right? Not a lot of people are actually doing it. And there's more volumes in the November contract closing November 15th than there is in the current contract closing September 15th. So futures price really only matters when a contract closes. It can go almost to anything that it wants in that month and a half, the 3 months in between, right? So it's legislated that at the end of a contract, futures has to be within $1 of cash during the contract. Wow. Yeah, okay. Right? So whoever's on futures right now, the people who were shorting or the people who were there are going to scramble because cash is like 600.
Right.
And futures is not even 500, and they have a little over 2 weeks to sort that out, right? And you'll see by the time it comes to, September 14th, almost all of the volumes are going to be in the November. They're already moving into January right now. And so for cash, for the wholesaler price print, the bottom for your benchmark Western spruce 2x4 is literally the $500 that we were talking about, because that is the cost of production. So during all that time from like 06 to 2017, when housing was depressed and 2x4s were around 250, that was sort of cost a little bit below cost of production at that time. So now we know the floor, and we know that the mills are more responsive where they will curtail, whereas, 10 years ago, they just kept running because they figured this is a short-term thing. And so we can say, emphatically that the price is not going to drop altogether below 500. I would say the range for where is the price going to be during that cycle from, February to Labor Day and et cetera, is between $600 and $800. $600
to $800 per thousand. And, at $600 to $800 per thousand, I mean, this to me, having been in the game a long time, and obviously there was cheaper lumber in the past, that doesn't seem out of the realms of what would be normal now. Like that to me seems like a very normalish price to be between 600 and 800. So like even now when we're seeing the cash price and the lumber futures price dropping as much as it has, I mean, between that 600 and 500 per thousand, I mean, really, this isn't a bad time to even start thinking about doing your projects. I mean, this is our time, right?
Yeah, like unless you want to be, if someone is asking as a person, unless you want to be out there putting a deck together in November, yeah, I would look now or keep an eye, like the week after Labor Day, I I would look the week after Labor Day and pretty much know that that's where things are going to land. And again, for cash or print price is volumes. And so, when people were, it's just the questions and people starting to find out about lumber that never knew anything about it before. You can't just learn it in 5 minutes. Right. And I had some conversations back in, mid 2020 when the price was just going crazy. And some people were like, oh, well, I'm going to invest. Like, I'm going to buy West Fraser shares, or I'm going to buy, whoever, buy some timberland or whatever. And it's like the amount of money that they're going to make by selling 4 sticks at $1,700. No, they want the price, like, let's say the 600 that we're talking about, and sell hundreds of rail cars. That's what they want. It's not a thing where the sawmills are like, okay, I'm going to, put the price into some insane level and I'm going to make a bunch of money, because you're not going to make. People are going to delay projects, switch to other materials, all kind of things, right? Cancel outright. So a nice medium level, like what you're saying, it doesn't seem that high, 600 to 800, where the market can bear and they can keep their mill running at like a good capacity, like 80%, 90%, and sell a lot of wood at that price.
Right. So let's kind of switch gears here a little bit. Let's talk about the building industry right now. So there's a lot of numbers and a lot of information coming out about the housing, hearing and reading articles about housing recession. What are your views? What do you see happening coming into the next year, a couple of years? What do you think is going to happen here with the housing market, especially in the new construction?
Well, yeah, for sure. And I do a press release every month when the housing starts comes out. I correlate that to the top 3 benchmark lumber prices: Eastern spruce, Western spruce, Southern pine. And it's a very good leading indicator. The lumber prices that I do come out every week for that week, and the housing starts comes out for the previous month. So it's like 6 weeks ago at the soonest, right? Something that people should really pay attention to is, like, you see the news release and it says housing starts down compared to last month. Okay, well, first of all, the first 6 months of this year had more housing starts than the first 6 months of last year. Okay, so month over month doesn't necessarily tell you anything. And a lot of times when the next release comes out, it says last month adjusted, and it's adjusted up. Okay, because they get the data, they get more data that comes in, and they are better able to do their work that they make and to get that one number, right? So there is a underlying pent up demand for housing that is a fact, and it has nothing to do with COVID or any of these supply chain and all of these situations that we're talking about. The largest cohort of first-time home buyer right now is millennials, and we are really at the beginning, 30 years old, just the beginning edge of that generation to be first-time home buyer. So apart from everything else, interest rate, inflation, we're not in a recession. I wouldn't call it a recession. I know that some people say that. We are in a little bit of a slowdown, but we were very heated up before that, right? So the housing outlook is quite good. The thing is that the appetite of the millennials is not the traditional single family home with a yard. They are much more interested in a community, multifamily, condo type thing with going to the community center, going to the school, having a store there, riding their bikes, this kind of thing, not about mowing the lawn, not about this kind of thing, right? So these kind of townhome and condo construction are, the bottom 2 floors are concrete, and then the top 3 floors are wood. And when you have that ratio of multifamily to single family, but if the volume of the multifamily does go up to the point where there's enough that maybe it's the same amount of wood as if there was a smaller amount of single family, right? So we're in a time of transition, and this to me is like fascinating. I look at it, basically every day. We're not going to be in a situation where we're having, 2.5 million housing starts as we were in that problem during 03, 04, 05. But we're also not in a situation where we have less than 1 million, where it wasn't enough.
That's it's really interesting to think about the new construction market, especially when you start talking into the multi-families or multi-residential living areas, condominiums or apartment complexes. Something that I have been following, and I think this is probably going to turn into a fairly good or fairly big building trend, and that's the cross-laminated timber industries, building high rises completely out of wood. What do you think about this?
That is the future. Those are all
the future, right?
Advanced building materials in engineered wood. So remember yesterday how we talked really quick about the peeler log and the number 2 saw log? Mm-hmm. This is the feedstock. So dimension lumber, in order to meet the building code, in order to meet the grade of what kind of wood is it, needs to come from a number 2 saw log. But there's a lot of different kind of logs. There's pulp logs, there's peeler logs, like I was saying, right? So cross-laminated CLT, LVL, laminated veneer lumber, LSL, laminated strand lumber, glue laminated lumber are all made from sheets. You take the log, you put it, it's not a saw blade, it's a long knife, and lengthwise, the log is rolled and it peels a long piece. It's then cut into sections and glued together in different forms. So CLT, cross-laminated, is glued together on a 45-degree angle. Part of it is using the resin from the tree, a little bit of this other glue material. I think they get it from China. And then it can be made into different forms. It is structurally as strong as steel. It doesn't burn. It's not a timber. Okay, people remember, oh, it's timber fire. It's not like that. It chars on the outside. And it has the ability to support a structure that doesn't need that sort of grid where you're used to in concrete buildings where the girders are spaced a certain amount and you always have to have walls. It can create a much more open concept type. So they use them like for community centers and universities and stuff like that. So the reason I get excited about it is because this feedstock is not impacted by the reduction of the timber supply from the pine beetle. There's a different pricing structure for peeler logs as compared to number 2 saw logs, because everybody goes after the number 2 saw log, and the poor little peeler log is like considered garbage or whatever. And what you sell it for is more than what you sell a 2x4.
Wow. Crazy. So this is, I never really thought about it this way. So this is actually taking an inferior kind of product and making it a better product out of it, right? You're taking the lesser of the trees that are available for sawing up to lumber, and you actually peel them up and make cross-laminated timbers or some other engineered product out of it. This is pretty cool. So it actually takes advantage of a lesser product to make a better product out of it. That's really cool. I never thought about that one before.
So the thing is that it needs a totally new, remember how I was saying yesterday, West Fraser closed Fraser Lakes, that's never going to reopen, but unless it's something else, you can't, like you'd have to completely take out all the sawmill equipment and put completely different equipment in, because it's not a manufacturing process like a sawmill. It's a completely different, like a panel mill, right? Like an OSB or plywood mill is not a sawmill. It's a totally different kind of mill. Uses a totally different kind of tree, but the process is completely different. So new machinery, everything, right? But the future is glorious. Yeah, it's an inferior tree. It doesn't need to be exactly straight all the way through. Like when say you're in your retail yard, right? And someone's like, well, I'm, making my entrance way. And you're like, well, here's some beautiful Western spruce 2x4, like high grade, because everybody's going to see this. But they're like, I'm doing my basement. And you're like, oh, I've got some number 4 plywood over here and just paint over it. Nobody's going to see that. That's the same idea. The trees, they can be more spindly and crooked and like this, because it's not going to be appearance, right? It's going to be made into something else. And it opens up the timber supply a lot for something that's, I wouldn't say lower, it's just underutilized. And so there's a lot of it available.
Yeah. And that's,
and the other thing is, they cannot get enough of it in Asia. Like that's what BC is doing right now, is we're exporting the few of these advanced mills that are in BC, and some of them are also down the coast, like Washington State and Oregon. are exporting to Asia because they cannot get enough of it. If you can imagine, there's already a market, and then it's breaking in. It's already in US and Australia, Japan, and breaking into North America. The building code for using these materials has been in place for a while. It was a matter of training the architects and the builders and getting the firefighters on board. So the firefighters are used to, we can't have higher than 6-story wood buildings because our ladders don't go, right? Oh. But if you're using CLT, which doesn't burn, so this training process has been going on and it's being adopted now, and it's starting to catch on, especially like architects on the U.S. Eastern Seaboard. You know, they're very gung ho on this, and it's got a very bright future.
Yeah, and not that I'm really a big believer in the whole green movement and that kind of thing going on, but this is being sold as a green product.
It is
as an environmental carbon, like
it is
like what is it, carbon locking product, because pretty much once the tree is grown, it locks the carbon up, and unless it burns or rots, it stays locked into the. So as concrete and steel is a very carbon intrusive, this is not. Like, this is a very green product, and I think it's going to be sold as that coming into the future. It's going to be a popular product for that reason.
Well, it's one of the selling points. And it has two sides of it. All of the carbon accounting, it's on two sides of the ledger. One is how much carbon are you expending and how much carbon are you storing. So for the timber, like these underutilized stands, a lot of this kind of wood does not have a very long lifespan. Like when people talk about old growth, right? We all love the 1,000-year-old cedar tree and the 300-year-old Douglas fir tree. Most timber lives in Northern Canada, 80 years, in the US South, 35 years. If it's not used, it is going to come down to wind, to storm, to pests, to fire, and release that carbon. If it's harvested and manufactured into something like a house, especially, which usually is about 100 years worth of time, that's locking in that carbon, and they'll be replanting. A growing tree absorbs a lot more carbon dioxide than a grown tree. So you want to keep that cycle going, right? Meanwhile, you have concrete and steel, which are not only not carbon neutral, but are incredibly water intensive. And a lot of the cement supply comes from the south part of the world that already doesn't have a lot of water. So there's room for everything. Like, you can't make a highway out of wood, right? Like, you need concrete and you need, towers and high rises. But in general, literally the only sustainable the only sustainable building material is lumber, because you can replant, and the trees, before they reach their sort of like 25, 30, 40 year age, will be absorbing a lot more carbon dioxide than those older trees that were there before. Nice.
Wow, this is great information. I know the viewers are just going to absolutely love it. We've covered a lot of stuff here. Was there anything that we missed, or anything that you would want to bring up for our viewers to hear, or think that there's something out there that's important for them to know?
Yeah, I think in terms of the data, like what we do with the lumber prices and what we're talking about with housing, something that's really important to note is it's not just the season and the cycle of the economy. When we have circumstances like weather emergencies, will be a demand. Like, you can really tell a lot by looking at plywood prices. Plywood is used for a lot more things than just building. And when there is destruction or expectation of some kind of storm, a lot of plywood is used, like boarding up windows, and then they have to re-roof after, all that kind of stuff. When in 2020, when there was all that social unrest, all those windows that had to be boarded up, and then when there was repairs going on. So there can be pretty big disruptions to the market, causing a rush on demand that changes the price, that nobody knew was going to happen, that you can't predict. So the best we can do is use the knowledge of the history, whether it's relevant or not, and what we know about macroeconomic, which is somewhat affected by political decisions, and hope that, for example, in BC, last year in Washington State, first we had a huge, terrible drought in the summer, and then massive storm, like tons of water came down all at once, which we are still reconstructing now. Nobody could have known that was going to happen. Part of the Conifex closure announced today is due to inability to ship material. I think you were saying, somebody was talking about how they drive by a sawmill and, oh my God, there's so much wood. There's wood everywhere. What's going on? They're holding back. They're trying to put the price up. No, that wood is sold and it's waiting to go to the customer. And the customer is freaking out because normally, depending on where you are, would be like 6 weeks, let's say 6 weeks or a couple of months to get your wood. Now you have to add an unknown another 6 weeks. You're watching the price go. And you're like, oh man, why did I order? Or why didn't I order? And on my project, the person is screaming, I can't just go and get more wood, $1,500. It's a difficult situation, but like for someone like me who's an observer, I find it very fascinating.
Oh yeah, I mean, the stuff that takes place within this industry, it's really, it is pretty incredible. There are so many working parts that go into this. It is like, it's hard to like wrap your head around everything that's going on. Well, I'm just curious because I know the viewers are going to be curious too. What do you think is going to happen with real estate prices? Oh,
if you look at my lumber prices and the data that came out this week because I look at new home prices, existing home prices, like what you were saying, we look at new housing starts and that kind of thing, right? Renovation and remodeling, by the way, is becoming a larger segment of the lumber demand. And that is data that has not been tracked. The National Association of Home Builders is working up a metric of how much remodeling activity there is, but there won't be any history. So when you don't have anything to compare it to, it's kind of, right? But the house prices were dropping as my lumber prices were dropping from like May until this month. And then this latest release that came out, they popped up a little bit, the housing prices, new house prices, right? So I think right now, though, that is a adjustment to the recent increase in lending rates and mortgages. And it's just kind of like a shuffling that's happening between people who were rushing to try to get into the market. I mean, honestly, just to be frank, if someone is priced out of getting a mortgage by a 0.1% increase, then maybe they shouldn't have been buying a house that expensive in the first place, kind of thing, right? And so then in that vacuum that happened in the past couple of months with a slowdown, other people who either were waiting or for some other reason are coming in. The number of home sales is down, but the price popped up a little bit.
Yeah. And that's something that I've been trying to follow quickly because, there's so many people who've been talking about a housing crash, right? It's going to be worse than the 07 or 08 financial crisis. And so, I try to take on that idea. Okay, let's see where's the evidence that's going to produce this situation. And, a lot of people are saying it's because of the interest rates rising that are going to cause the situation where people would not be able to afford these homes, or at least be able to afford the payments on it. I've thought about that a little bit. And, with the amount of cash buyers that are coming into the market right now, those guys don't really care what the interest rates are. They're willing to buy at this price. And that should say a lot to where the level is going to be if there's so many cash buyers willing to pay at this price level and be there at it. The other thing go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, the thing is that, so we're not in 07. It's nothing like that at all. There's so many things that are different about it now than it was then. One thing that speaks to what you're saying is that there has been over these past recent years a trend for bigger homes. So one of the reasons why the price keeps going up, right? Like the actual average price of any home went to something like $330,000 because the homes were getting bigger, like 5 bathrooms and all that. And we're seeing now a reversal of that, where sort of like a more normal, like a regular size home is becoming more fashionable, which will make it more affordable for regular people, and also people who maybe don't want to be in this speculation where they're always thinking it's going to go higher and higher, and then someone's going to be left when it does crash, right? So the home sizes are coming back down to a nominal affordable, and I don't really know about how much the all cash buyer, but that is a very positive indicator that there is momentum to desire for continuing to more home buying.
Yeah. And, I just kind of look at some of these things, because, I'm not trying to be like a predictor of where I think it should go or anything like that, but just try to look at like the current trends and give an idea on what it is that I feel is going to be happening. And when it comes to like house prices, they have elevated so fast, so high, so fast, that even if you were to have a significant downturn in prices, it would really just be coming back down to normal, right? I mean, even with a significant drop in prices. So I see where there could be a lot of room for, say, a correction in the market, but I just don't see how a crash is really going to occur when you have such a low amount of inventory and such a high demand for homes. I do see where a correction could happen, but I just don't see where that call for a crash is actually going to take place.
No, it's not going to crash. Like if people just look at the month over month, it might look scary. But if you look year over year, or especially like what I was saying about my lumber prices compared to 2020, if you look year over a couple years, even what you're saying with a correction down, it's still an increase. And with the mortgage rates, like when people have concern over 1%, 2%, and then other people are like, well, when I bought in 70s, it was 10%, but the price of the home was 40,000.
Right.
And wages have not multiplied by 10 times. Like in real terms, wages are almost the same as they were in 1973. Right. Right. So while I'm saying, maybe if the mortgage rate increased by 0.1% and you're priced out, maybe you shouldn't be looking at that home. But that's how much is that? That's like $40,000, right? Right. So a certain amount of historical understanding is definitely worthwhile, but really watching what's happening at this time, and like you were saying yesterday, like there's so much more information available now than there used to be in the past, right? People can sort of like find out for themselves, and obviously be careful because there's people out there saying things that are blatantly wrong. Like, I don't know how they get any viewers at all. And and the real estate thing, we talk about nationally, the lumber prices are North America, right? If you're buying Western spruce, if you're on a wholesaler level buying Western spruce, if you're in Texas or if you're in Prince George in the middle of British Columbia, it's the same price. It's FOB mill, right? But housing is very regional, and you can drill down because it comes down to volume, right? The big states, Texas, California, they skew what is the price of a home because that's where the high end and fashionable, more wealthy people are going, right? If you look regionally, some house prices are down below what they were in 2019. It really depends a lot, right? I would look regionally. I would be like US Northeast, Florida can be its whole own thing because it's a lot of speculation. Like Vegas and Florida are always people speculating. And then there's Texas and California, like I was saying, the whole Midwest. If you look at it regionally, you can start to get a better idea of what is your appetite for the type of home that you would want and what's happening specifically with the market. Yeah,
absolutely. This has been a great conversation, Kéta. I just love talking with you. I feel like I could just talk all day. Yeah. I don't know how far have we gone on to this interview now? I don't know.
Can you see?
I can't.
Yesterday it gave me a thing that said 9 minutes. We can talk about the duty if you want to. It's not really.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the duty?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's talk a little bit more
Okay.
about the duty.
Okay. I think somebody put, I can't remember if it was on your YouTube, but I saw a comment today that like it went from 20% to 8%. I can talk about that if you want.
Yeah, let's cover that a little bit because I'm sure that's going to be
Oh,
some
1 minute. He says 1 minute. There's no way.
It's 1 minute. Oh,
You have to
I
do
think
your,
we're getting close.
let's do another one after Labor Day, like in 3 weeks, like I said.
Okay.
And
Well,
do your little, if you do your ending, end it this time so they know.
Well, how about this? Give a quick shout out to your lumber report so we know where to go after we watch the video. We'll know where we're headed to, and then I'll do the outro.
Okay, madisonsreport.com. Go on the website at the top on the menu, click subscribe, fill out a form. I'll send you a sample. Have a look at what the prices that we cover are and what the actual prices for that week are. And then if you want to subscribe to my dashboard and get the data.
Thank you so much, Kéta. This has been just a great interview, great